If in the Silicon Valley there is one person who goes against the mainstream and yet wins, that's Mike Maples, the star of the Silicon Valley. So Mike is a founding partner at Floodgate. He's been on the Forbes Midas list since 2010. And we all know this Midas list, the King Midas, who whatever he touches turns into gold. That's Mike. He was also named one of the 8 rising stars by Fortune magazine. Some of Mike's investments include Twitter, Twitch TV, Weebly, Chegg, Bazaar Voice, Spiceworks, Okta, and Demand Force. Mike, welcome on stage.
It's fun to see Michael Furtick here, actually. He's someone I've had a few adventures with in the past. One of the first companies we ever invested in was Reputation.com. And so we've gotten in trouble in numerous ways. So that's kind of neat. So I'm a little bit nervous about this topic because I've never really put it in a speech format before. But I wanted to share some of my perspective. I think that right now, the way the tech industry is describing itself is contrary to how it needs to be describing itself. So when a founder comes in and pitches me and says, I'm going to disrupt X, I almost, excuse my language, but I almost want to throw up in my mouth, right? Because like great founders, they want to create abundance and they have a growth mindset and a creation mindset. Somebody comes in to me and says, I'm going to disrupt healthcare. Why do you want to disrupt doctors? What do you have against medical folks? And so I think that unfortunately our language has been somewhat dumbed down by immature language, and that we need to do a better job not only making the case for abundance as an industry, but also thinking about abundance as we create our own companies. That's ultimately what I'm in it for. And so I haven't given this talk before, so it's probably you're gonna see some sausage being made, and I'll try to give enough time for questions. So this is kind of our overall mission. We believe that in any given year, 10,000 startups get created, and 10 of them create 95% of the value in the industry. It's our job to find these entrepreneurs who will create an abundant future and to back them and believe in them before the rest of the world believes, before there's a parade to jump in front of. We want to be more co-conspirators than investors. And if the car crashes, we go through the windshield with them. And that's just kind of how we are, right? We're not very good at the buy low, sell high game. We're a little bit more emotional than that. And so I'm going to set the table for the notion of abundance. I wanted to rewind a little bit. So most of us today, when we think about companies, we just assume that there's always been companies that have stock and cap tables, shares, and that kind of thing. But in 1800, there were no big companies anywhere. And then a couple things happened. The railroad and the steam engine. And so up until the railroad and the steam engine, companies, you wouldn't have even called it a company. You had sole proprietors, you had blacksmiths, you had fur traders, you had just very small organized entities. And I think the biggest companies in America were these spinning looms on the rivers of Waltham, Massachusetts. But you didn't have big companies as you think of them today. But the railroad and the steam engine created the context for the modern corporation. That plus JP Morgan's innovation in the stock market. Now, that just like it seems confusing to buy cryptocurrency or a token today in an ICO, if you'd gone to a blacksmith and offered them shares in a railroad in 1820, they would have been like, what good is this? I can't buy groceries with it. I can't, why would I want to own one fractional seat on one railroad card? It doesn't really make sense. And so it was hard for people to get their mind around, but it was necessary because no individual on Earth had enough money to finance a transcontinental railroad. So we had to come up with a breakthrough financing innovation in addition to the innovation of the railroad, the steam engine. Well, once you had a transcontinental railroad, once you had steam engines in factories, you could have mass production and mass distribution. And then this happened. Capitalism rubs certain people in certain ways, and people have their own views of what it really is, what it isn't. I try to never apologize for it because I think it's a freaking miracle, right? Like I look at like what happened from 1800 to 2000, it blows my mind, right? The standard of living goes up 14 times. Are you kidding me? And before the 1800s, the 16, 1700s, most of humanity was always teetering at the edge of survival every day. And then it was like modern corporations, like a light switch turned on and created abundance for the entire world. Another just quick thing, companies learned they had to deal with a new type of trade-off. So how many people have heard of Adam Smith and the invisible hand? Okay, quite a few probably. The invisible hand kind of suggests that people can take decentralized, self-interested action, and the combined force of that creates kind of a greater good, even if it wasn't the intended goal of all participants. How many have heard of The Visible Hand by Alfred Chandler? So maybe not as many, but The Visible Hand basically talked about how coordinating resources, vertical integration, horizontal integration, org charts, salaried managers, accounting, all those things helped bring about these modern companies. But like, it's easy to assume now what was once a future thing. Like in 1830, there was no accounting. There were no org charts. There were no salaried managers. There was no pricing theory. There was none of that, right? So people like Rockefeller and Carnegie and J.P. Morgan, all these people had to make this up as they went along. There also weren't child labor laws. They also had to bust up the monopolies and things like that. So it was a messy time as well, but all the stuff we take for granted today had to be invented. In the days of companies, and you'll see I'm using companies past tense here pretty soon because I think that companies are about to be superseded by networks that are software defined. You had some companies that were highly decentralized and low coordination, so like bond traders. So like bond traders in an investment bank aren't really managed, right? They kind of eat what they kill. And if they succeed at trading or selling, they make money. If they don't make money and they need to find a different line of work. But you'd never run IBM like a bond trading floor. So IBM and companies like GE or the military have a lot more centralization. But what I've learned is that there's no absolute right answer. Some companies are more oriented towards the visible hand of centralized coordination. Some are more oriented towards the invisible hand of decentralized motivation, if you will. Companies like Johnson & Johnson are some of both. They have 300 operating companies. So they have centralization within the companies, but they're decentralized in the span of the companies. Okay, so why does that matter? I think two powerful forces are redefining business. So some people call it Moore's law, but I think of it more broadly than that. It's mass computation. So it'd be the ability not just to processor speed, but it would also be how fast and cheap can we sequence a genome, or how much data can we store for a given unit of price. And so that's on an exponential improvement curve. And then the second thing that's exponential is mass connectivity. And I think what mass production and mass distribution were to corporations, mass computation, mass connectivity are to networks and the new sets of companies that are going to matter in the future. And basically, so far, my job has been to find these networks that are going to bring abundance. Now, one of the reasons I'm excited about this is that because both of these laws are exponential, they can bring abundance to everybody. And so I think that our job as business people should be to try to bring abundance to every man, woman, and child on Earth as soon as we can, and to not tolerate the rent-seeking activities that prevent us from doing that in the business world. What's interesting, a couple things. Networks expand the efficient frontier of abundance. So networks allow localized decision-making to occur algorithmically rather than always requiring market intermediaries. And networks also allow coordination that used to require management intermediaries to become digital, which means they can both jump to an exponential improvement curve. And this is why a network capitalist or network-centric business like Lyft will always beat the taxis unless the government protects the taxis. It's not because the taxis are dumb or like bad people. It's that Lyft is on a fundamentally better abundance creation curve. And so all things being equal, they just have weapons that the other companies that are operating like normal corporations just don't have. And the ability to combine the invisible hand of ad hoc coordination between drivers and riders, but you don't own all of the drivers, is a fundamental advantage. But there will be lots of there will be lots of different opportunities here on the curve. So, how many of you are paying attention to cryptocurrency, by chance? So, one of the things that I've noticed about crypto is some of my friends in that neighborhood are almost religious about decentralization. And you know, I even talk to some people who say, I'm going to reinvent Facebook, but I'm going to do it in a decentralized way using crypto and tokens. And I look at that and I say, well, you know, show me something that's got a non-crappy looking UI, because I haven't even seen it yet, right? Like, much less create an actual finished product that would compete with Facebook. And so, like, I try not to be religious about it, right? I believe that some situations we're going to find that more centralized control of the network is the winning strategy. And in some situations, decentralized control of the network is going to be the winning strategy. And sometimes it might be a hybrid, like, say, Lyft. So Lyft owns their service, but they don't employ all the drivers. So they're decentralized in that anybody can be a driver, but they're centralized in that it is the Lyft service. You can't just, that community can't just fork the token and just go elsewhere. And I think that so how many of you, if you think about your business, think of it as a software-defined network-centric company? Just out of curiosity. Okay. So I would encourage you to all think, and James Currier and the NFX Guild have some good write-ups on network effects. And then there was another pitch from Andreessen Horowitz on this that I thought was good, called All About Network Effects. I would highly encourage any entrepreneur to be intentional about thinking about how they can put network effects in their business. Because the number one thing I see happen with most startups is, even if they work, they're not defensible enough against the fast followers or the big companies. And network effects, in my experience, have been the most durable moat that a startup can build over time. And what I find is that network effects can be premeditated. They don't have to be accidental. And I try to, whenever I look at a startup, I try to go through the 20 different kinds of network effects that we know about and ask myself, could this network effect apply to this company as part of its core product offering? But the other thing is, for those of you who do believe that your company has a chance to be software-defined and network-centric or oriented, I think that having a point of view about what parts of your network service are centralized versus not is important. And I think that it's good to have a point of view about it without having a religious point of view about it. Because in the end, the customer's always right, and the place on the curve that brings the most abundance is the right place for you to be, right? Like, if I believe if somebody tries to start a social network up there, they'll lose to Facebook. Just like, another one that I see a lot is people saying, I'm going to create a decentralized service that competes with AWS. And that doesn't, maybe that'll happen, but that doesn't really jibe with my sensibilities, right? What jibes with my sensibilities is to create a new type of abundance, a new way with a new approach, rather than to take something that's already working pretty well and apply a religious different approach just because of the religion. In the tech industry, though, we need to get out of our own way, and these are the main things. And if we're not careful, there's going to be a big backlash against tech. And the reason I care about that is not we won't make as much money or raise as much money or whatever. The reason I care about that is that I believe that bringing forward abundance in an exponential, software-defined, mass computation, mass connectivity world is the way we bring humanity forward, is the way that we allow people to not have to walk 6 hours 2 ways a day to get water, or to let everybody in the world have a world where they have hopes for their kids and not just trying to survive from one day to the next. But if we can't make the case for abundance, we'll hold not only ourselves back but the world back, because we won't be able to get to that better place we all want to be, because we'll have friction and resistance that's wrong-headed and misguided. So I've got a couple more minutes, so maybe I should just take some questions if that's okay.
Questions?
Fascinating conversation. I'm trying to wrap my mind around what you mean by businesses are going to become software-defined networks. Can you expand on that?
Yes. So if you think about how companies got built, it was basically about material abundance. And so you had materials coming in, and then you had the ability to convert those raw materials to widgets, right? That were mass produced and then mass distributed and mass marketed. I believe that we are now entering a world of digital abundance, and so most of the value creation in the economy is going to be in the world of bits and not atoms. And I think that the orchestrating mechanism of those bits are going to be network-centric. And so to me, there's a difference between a software-enhanced business. Like Johnson & Johnson has computers, but they're not software-defined. Nokia had computers and software, but they thought they were in the business of selling widgets. Apple created a network capitalist phone. And they had the same market cap at the time the iPhone shipped, and Nokia ended up selling their phone business for like $250 million, and Apple's phone business, which I think is worth the majority of the company, is worth more than like $700 billion now. And so that's how I look at it. I'm a big believer of this guy, Buckminster Fuller, who used to talk about ephemeralization. And one of the other reasons I'm excited about it is not just the exponential potential, but also the potential for a more sustainable world that doesn't rely quite on so much material input and output to create prosperity.
One more question.
Okay, sure,
Yes,
you bet.
last one.
Hi, Mike over here on the side. How are you?
Good.
Hey, so you started by talking that, saying that the entrepreneurs who come to you and say, I want to disrupt this industry, don't really have the right message. And then you talked about these networks. So go back to the start. What should the message be from an entrepreneur?
Yeah. So, and by the way, I don't really blame the entrepreneurs for it. I think a lot of entrepreneurs are getting bad advice. And so they talk to their mentors and other folks, and they're like, VCs, they want to hear how you're disrupting something. So go talk about disruption. And like Logan and John, when they pitched us Zimride, which eventually became Lyft, they didn't say death to taxis, right? They said, hey, cities are now designed around cars and not people. Cars are 3% capacity utilized. We've got enough parking space in America to cover the state of Connecticut. And we need to invert this and make rides more of a community thing, and to be less wasteful and more social. And so that was what they were all about. Now, Zimride didn't work at first. Well, it worked, but didn't work great. And then we launched this experiment called Lyft, and it became very clear that that was the company. But like, in my experience, the great entrepreneurs they transcend the advice of well-wisher, but what I would say short-term and overly buzzword-centric advisors. And they think about how they want to make the world better for customers or for society in general. And they're much more focused on that than who they want to put out of business. You know, I think in the end, disruption is what happens after you are right. And it happens almost by accident after the fact, not by some premeditated thing, right? Like Logan and John started Lyft out of creation and love, not out of disruption and trying to run somebody out of business. And so I would just say to all founders, if people are saying otherwise, like who do we disintermediate, who do we disrupt, who do we do this to, who do we do that to, I think maybe you need better advisors, because I just disagree with that. I haven't met any of the great entrepreneurs I've met don't think that way. And if you think that's not how I think either, I think you should have the courage of your convictions and listen to sort of your inner voice and go with that. Yeah.
Thank you, Mike.